It's Benjamin Douglas Ray with another edition of Sustainable Cannabis TV. Today I'm here with Jon Thompson. He is the founder and CEO of extraktLAB. How you doing today?
Doing great. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah,
Another one.
isn't it?
They just keep coming.
They keep coming. So this show is brought to you by BuzzFeed, LinkedIn for Leaders Online, and 8 Saints brand organic hemp CBD products using Colorado high elevation Colorado hemp. So,
Right.
Jon, I would love to hear about your background. You know, we've got some similar experiences, very, very deep. You've got a PhD. You've run an MSO. Tell us about your experience. It's a super fascinating story.
Sure, no problem. I started off as a separation scientist, getting a PhD in that area. Spent a bunch of time in corporate America, basically doing engineering projects around the world. It was a great time. Went and decided to start my own company and did a whole bunch of weird projects. We worked for NASA and we worked for the Air Force. We did some mining projects in gold mining. And right around 2014, 2015, we decided to, my college pal came to me and said, hey, I'm going to start this company. Why don't you guys do all the science and get us up and running? And I said, oh yeah, we're in for that. So that started me on the cannabis route and really helped write all the technical aspects of several different licenses, which we helped that MSO get licensed in several different states. And we also built out, their facilities from the standpoint of extraction and formulation and end products and things like that. So, and ever since then, we've been putting people into the business. My company, United Science and extraktLAB, we've been putting people in the business all the way in Canada, South America, into Europe, in the US, obviously. We've built facilities. We've consulted on the management side. We've implemented, quality systems, software, and of course, equipment. A lot of people really think about us when they hear about us. They say, "Okay, those are equipment guys." We have a full solution though, so we've been doing a lot of things in this industry, and it's just been a really great time.
I was looking through the stuff on your website over the past couple of weeks, and I see you have a checklist on there, which is really interesting to me because you're actually giving a roadmap for what people need to think about before they get into this business. Because I think a lot of people just say, "Hey, let's do this," but it's very complicated. And I've got a bit of a story here. When I was working with my team on a MIP here in Colorado, we had to go through, let's say, 100 different things. Checklist, like you talk about, the facility, standard things like the power and the light and location. But there are things in there like we had to work on curb cuts and, trees to go in. I mean, it's a very, very complicated situation. And we were some of the first in this jurisdiction, and the inspectors had never done a MIP before. They'd never done anything of the sort. So we had to build these relationships over time. And I actually even brought donuts to the fire marshal, spent time with the building inspector. But I absolutely can say that without those relationships built, not because they were the right kind of donuts, because I spent time going through all of the checklists that they have, we got our deal done. And I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So what you're doing on that consulting side with your checklist, which I'd like you to post it, in the comments below after, is extremely valuable to anyone who's starting to think about starting a cannabis or hemp facility.
Absolutely. You need to think about checklists, not only your building checklist, your facility checklist, but also quality checklists, your personnel checklists, understanding what it is that it takes. So really dig in, hit some mini courses, do the guides, that type of thing. We'll throw some links in the bottom. Sounds really great.
Awesome. Well, as this show is, here's a comment here from Calissa. Can't wait to see the checklist. Awesome. All right, we'll put it in the comments below. It's really good. So as you know, this show is about sustainability and cannabis. So I'd love to hear about sustainability, kind of your points around that in terms of what you guys do in your extraktLAB business, whether it's consulting or anything. Let's talk about sustainability.
Right. Well, sustainability can be a catchphrase for a lot of different things. From an architectural standpoint, people are looking at, okay, are buildings sustainable? The building materials that we are using sustainable? And they really focus on, like carbon footprint and things like that associated with the building. That's energy usage. From a mix standpoint or from a processing standpoint, it's very similar set of criteria that you might apply, looking at different criteria for sustainability. One of the things that's come up a lot recently is the sustainability of the packaging. Of course, we have a very packaging intense industry, right? A lot of people are doing like CPG or consumer-based products. Those are all plastics. They're filling up the landfills. They're filling up things like that. So there's a whole bunch of things related to sustainability that you need to consider when you're starting in on your basically making a hemp processing plant or a manufacturing plant. And what we typically do, and we've had lots of experiences in this, it's been a great time. We've worked with a lot of people up in Canada, for example, which are licensed producers up there. They look at sustainability because they have, some of the provinces have carbon tax credits and carbon credits. So we've actually been able to implement carbon negative extraction facilities. It's pretty impressive. And we do that using various extraction techniques, and then we plow the outputs of those techniques back into the grow. So it's actually a negative process. It's really cool. But when a customer comes to us and they're saying, hey, I have a goal for you guys, when you guys consult for us and you guys have a system that we're going to have you design into our facility or design into our workflow or design into our process, and we feel as a company goal or a company value that we want it to be emphasized to sustainability. There are basically three different things that we really think about. The first one, and you can see them right up behind me, is carbon footprint. Okay, carbon footprint is one of those things where it has a big difference in terms of how much energy are you using, the chemicals and the things that you're using, how much carbon footprint did it actually take to use those, and then how much of that are you actually using. So when you're thinking about carbon footprint, typically what you do is if you have a grow and a manufacturing facility, the grow would offset your manufacturing facility, okay? But if you only have a manufacturing facility, it's important that you look at carbon footprint. The second thing is energy usage, and this is a really big one, especially for you hemp processors out there who want to go big or go home. You really need to think about what kind of energy usage that you're going to, implement in your plant. If you're going to go with a traditional solvent process, you really should sit down for a couple minutes with a mechanical engineer or us. We can give you the numbers and just look at the amount of energy that you're going to be using. Are you going to have 750 kilowatt pots out there in order to run your facility? That's been a big issue. A lot of people are like, oh, okay, I'm going to use this, solvent and everything's going to be peachy. But then they get the bill on the other end of it, and it's not so good. Okay. The third thing would be waste generation. Okay, and that is what is the waste that is being generated in your facility. Okay. If you are using a solvent-based technique, one of the things you really have to think about is all the VOC that you're going to be letting off into the atmosphere when the biomass dries of that last 3 or 4% of ethanol. Okay, you need to think about that because especially if you're concerned about sustainability. Okay, so those are the three things really that I think about when I think about sustainability.
Part of that, the second aspect about the mechanical engineer or electrical, what I found here in Colorado, we were talking about this a couple of days ago, is a lot of people go into old buildings. It's not new construction. And
right.
So the building that we went into, we shared that with a couple other, similar type businesses. And in the end, one of them was an indoor grow, and they built their system out before they really realized how much power that was going to take based on what they wanted to do. And so then they had to upgrade really the power coming into the building, only to find out that the lines there, that the grid didn't come out enough to support what they wanted to do for their growth. So they had to completely start over after, 4 months of plans, after spending a lot of money on consultants just to find that out. So I would second the fact with all three of these is to do your homework, hire somebody, it's not your expertise outside who's been there and done that before, so that you don't run into challenges like that.
Yeah, they really do. And, that energy usage thing is a big one. If you're concerned about a low energy platform, you really need to think about, okay, if I'm going to use 150 gallons of solvent per day, I have to cool that down to -20 or -40 degrees, and then I have to heat it back up, and I have to do that repeatedly, right? That's a lot of kilowatts of energy that you're dealing with. So, just like a car, you can buy, an inexpensive car that has a very bad gas mileage and very bad EPA measurements and all kinds of emissions. Or you could buy a more expensive car with all of that, sustainability aspects built right into it. Okay, so this is really what you're talking about. I mean, the sustainability is going to cost you money, but it can also save you money. Okay, and if you do the math, which I really recommend that you do, go look at some of the calculators that have been made. If you buy a car, say for $5,000 and it costs you 20, you're getting 20 miles to the gallon out of it, right? And then you buy a car that's maybe $20,000, but you're getting 200 miles to the gallon out of it. Okay, this car does not exist. Okay, but you know what I mean. You are getting value in use. Okay, and you're getting sustainability at the same time. It's costing you more money up front, but your overall costs are a lot less going into the future. So you've got to really look at your costs from the standpoint of cumulative costs. To make the argument that sustainability is good for you and good for your business. And I really encourage you to do that. We have calculators on our website. You can go and do that from a sustainability standpoint.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Well, let's talk about extraction methods, really. And then what are the kind of pluses and minuses as related to sustainability?
Right. So I kind of have really brought it down to two different extraction methods that are out there, although they are very similar in terms of what they end up doing. You're basically converting your biomass into some oils, right? That's what extraction does. You may have, distillation in there, to get the type of oil that you're looking for, but typically extraction really has to do with taking the biomass, getting the flavors and aromas out of it, and then getting all of the essential oils out of it, and then figuring out what to do with that waste. Okay, so there are a couple different ways to do this, and they really boil down to what solvent you're using and the process you're using. Okay, but it really comes down to solvents, and really you have supercritical fluids, which are called, everybody knows CO2 because it's bubbles in your sodas and things like that. So you can use that CO2 actually to do extraction. And then another very popular technique is ethanol, and that's what I would call solvent techniques. I would also include butane and those other techniques also in there. So assuming that you have your facility and that you've taken care of all of the inspectors that you were talking about, and the fire code and all the control areas and all of the chillers and all the energy and all that stuff, there's a couple things to think about when you just step back and look at the extraction technique in and of itself. And you can see here, I have a little chart that I made up for you. The first one is comparing carbon footprint between ethanol and CO2 energy usage and waste gen. Okay, the first thing with carbon footprint, you need to be thinking about this. With ethanol or with any other solvent technique, you're going to be buying lots and lots of ethanol, just tons of it. Okay, well, not tons of it. It depends on your scale, okay? But you're going to be buying lots of ethanol. You have to realize from a sustainability standpoint that it took 53,956 BTUs per gallon to make 1 gallon of ethanol. That's a lot of carbon, and that's a lot of energy. So that's all, basically if you're getting it from a corn process or from a soy process, that's what you're really doing. CO2, on the other hand, is typically, it comes from natural gas, and they reclaim it, and natural gas is a part of the process. The overall carbon credit is given at the natural gas. So the Gas Association, American Gas Association, or the Asian Gas Association, the European Gas Associations considers the CO2 to already be like almost carbon neutral, because it's not creating you're not actually making the CO2. Some people reclaim it from the ethanol process, and that's another way to get it. But a lot of people, get it from, say, the gas process. So it's kind of a reclaimed, reused, industrially reused eluent already. So it's a zero carbon footprint technique. If you use that CO2 and you put it back into your grow, you can actually go to a negative carbon footprint. So really, you're talking about a 0 to a negative carbon, as opposed to a very large carbon footprint with your ethanol. So that's just with the usage of CO2 or the usage of ethanol. You need to think about that if you're thinking about sustainability from a standpoint of carbon and carbon credits. Okay.
So you're talking about like if you were a vertically integrated company and you could do both of those, you could use them. Otherwise, you'd have to have a secondary market to capture the CO2 and sell that. So,
right. You mean from the ethanol or from the CO2?
From the CO2.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, the emissions from CO2 is negligible. It's really small. So because you're always recycling it, and the ethanol too, they also recycle. The issue really comes when in the waste gen. So when you're recycling, you're getting all that ethanol, you're putting it into the biomass. It's sticking to the biomass, and you don't get all the ethanol out, right?
Okay.
So when you take that out and you put it outside, that ethanol then emits into the atmosphere as a VOC. Plus, it makes that particular waste itself, depending on the jurisdiction you're in, they consider it to be hazardous. All right, so you have to really think about that and look at your local jurisdiction as to what they want you to do with biomass that has ethanol in it. So that's where the waste gen side of it really comes for, and also the VOC side of it. So the other thing would be energy use, and that is it's tremendous amount of BTUs to continuously cycle something, a fluid like ethanol, down to minus 40 degrees. It's a lot of, and the larger the scale is, the larger the larger the energy usage. And so if you're talking about, doing a ton or 2 tons or even 3 tons a day, you're looking at about 70x usage between here and here. So, and that can mean a lot of different things. That could mean like the added cost of putting in another couple of electrical pots outside of your facility, right? It could mean a whole new line coming in, with all those concomitant costs. So you're talking, to put a new line in with the pot and the switch gear and all that stuff, it's going to cost you 70, 80 grand, easy. And that's if you're really close to the line. If you're farther away, you're talking about could be over $100,000. So when you think about overall cost of what you're looking at, sustainability is something that you really need to think about, because it's really talking about real issues that are going to affect your everyday operating costs. So it's not just a nice to have. I think it's actually it's a must have. And so companies have been out there, up in Canada, most all of the operations up there use CO2 for this reason. And that's what I know. Yeah.
The cost, when you're talking about budgeting, I think here in Colorado, working with MIG, with Marijuana Industry Group, I think the recommendations were for whatever your budget is, you have to triple it. I mean, that's really what it came out to be, not just as a plan for this, but this is what you're going to do, but actually plan for that because of all these other costs. And I'm not talking about the lost costs, in terms of what you could recapture. I'm just talking about what it costs to get a facility up and running, for sure.
Yeah. Over the hundreds of facilities that we put together, and we have done hundreds of them, I always say, hey, Johnny T's rule of 2, and it's just twice as long and twice as much money. If you apply that to your projection, you're fine. Yeah.
It's absolutely true. Yeah. Some of the viewers and listeners on here may not understand the difference between extraction methods like closed loop, supercritical, like open blast, like hexane, butane. Could you give a brief overview of the differences of those?
Yeah. So, you have, so a lot of different things in there. So we have butane, we have ethanol, which is a solvent. Butane is a gas. Unless they compress it into a liquid, and then they run it through run it through the the cannabis. The ethanol is a liquid already. They run it through the cannabis, and then the CO2 they have to make it into a liquid, and then they run that through the cannabis. The effects of all three of those different types of solvents is that the oils dissolve in that fluid, and then the fluid conveys the oils away and separates it in space. Okay, so here's my biomass here, and then here's my oil over here. Now, some people open blast, and then some people close loop, and what that means is essentially the fluid, the CO2 or the ethanol or the butane, can be fed back into the beginning of the system, so it's a loop. That's called a closed loop system, and that works nicely. Usually you have to when you do closed loop, you can do that, but you have to get the solvent out of the biomass itself. Think about that. Now, how do you do that with a liquid like ethanol, for example? A lot of people, they spin it really quick, so they can try to get everything out, but they don't get everything. They typically lose 1 to 5%. That 1 to 5% can mean a huge operating cost and lots of VOC. So keep that in mind. The CO2, of course, is a gas. It's not a problem. You can just pull it out. It's not a problem. It automatically comes out. The butane also, you can lessen the pressure, and it will also come out. So you're kind of doing pretty well on the closed loop versus the open loop. Now, the open loop is when you don't actually cycle that solvent back to the beginning. You just blast it out. Now, this is what the Canadians were doing with their grows. They were open blasting CO2. They would open blast, say, 20 pounds an hour or something like that. Okay, and what that meant was they would vent out the CO2 extractor into the grow, and in order to maintain a certain part per million of CO2. And the plants loved it. Of course, they're growing. So you're plowing it actually back, the CO2 back into the biomass. So that was the difference between. So that's the difference between open loop and closed loop, and kind of the three different techniques that are popular.
It's great, and I would say if anyone has questions, ask you, because you're clearly the expert here. Awesome. Well, let's talk about then carbon footprint in terms of what you do. I mean, it's super important. We've touched on it a little bit, but really, when you talk about that, about reducing that, or just the issues around it, what do you think about with your customers?
Well, in terms of the carbon footprint right now, a lot of the customers that we have are not thinking about it, because it's not really a government mandated thing. They're not looking, but some of the more I think more up in Canada, they are thinking about that. So they're looking at it from the total process. Okay, here's my plant. Here's all of the items. Here's all my solvents. Here's how much waste I'm going to do. So they actually have an entire footprint calculation, and we can help you with that calculation, no problem at all. I think we kind of have gone through the calculations already. We know which ones are better than others, and there's trade-offs with everything. So there is no silver bullet. There is no free lunch. Everything is a trade-off. You're trading off cost, efficiency, and throughput. You're always trading those three things off. So that's where you really need some engineers and people who are familiar and who've made up these facilities from this viewpoint of sustainability to really help you through that process.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely important, and something, if it's not mandated, as we've seen, people typically have not done it in this industry.
Right. Yeah, the other thing would be the biomass. That's something that really a lot of people, they really don't look at. The biomass, if you have a lot of solvent that's stuck in your biomass, and then you try to manifest that, or you throw that into the dumpster, I mean, and it has that biomass in it, it's much more flammable, okay? And so that's something you need to think about. At least at the very minimum, you need to declare that to your waste manifester. Or, the other thing would be, problem with that would be composting it. What is you're really not able to compost it until you get that ethanol out. So we've had people actually, we had like 15,000 pounds delivered to us one time that had been extracted with ethanol already. but it had like 6 or 7% CBD left in it. Okay, so they were just, bagging it up and sticking it in there, getting the main portion out. But they also had acetone in there, they had IPA in there, they had hexane in there. So, that's where the use of denatured ethanol can also be kind of a negative, because how are you, what's the cost of the biomass, to get rid of it? And do you really want that to have to go into landfill versus a compost? I think everybody listening to this podcast wants to have their biomass composted, right? So from a sustainability standpoint, you send it off to a composter, sell it to a farmer. The farmer can put it back into, till it back into the land or whatever.
So are there markets for that? I mean, do people know what to do, or do they just throw it in the dumpster typically?
Most everybody I know throws it into the dumpster. Some of the places that are more rural, they can just go outside and they have a compost pile and they put it in the compost pile. So it really depends on the location. I've seen a lot of different operations. I've seen where people have to manifest it as hazardous waste, and that's a jurisdictional thing. And it's also, like you were saying, it's kind of depends on the inspector, right? So, right. So if you're going to, that's something you should think about, and that actually is on my checklist.
Yeah,
Make sure that if you're going to do it,
the way that the codes are written, they're not clear. They are green or green and gray.
Right.
With the word whatever gray is in the green industry, but
they're open to interpretation.
Codes can be written if they're new. They can be written, and it says a sentence, but two different inspectors can have a completely different interpretation of what that is. And they are the ones who are stamping off on your drawings or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So it's extremely important to understand the history of these, inspectors, regulators, really create those relationships to understand how to work with them so that they can, get things approved on their end with their belief system and not inhibit the process. So you really have to work together with someone who is assigned to approving your facility.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing you need to think about when you're talking about your facility is, how your venting or your exhaust out of your building, and what are you going to do with that exhaust? You should be in good contact because they're going to want to know, okay, is there a VOC emission? If you are in an urban area and you have a lot of exhaust, you should be thinking about how to deal with that VOC as it comes out of your exhaust system. Okay. So just be thinking about that. And, it is absolutely true that the less urban you are, if, the less stringent the requirements are going to be. That's just been my experience. Even so, even in the highly regulated areas like in California, it just is much more, it's easier to do business. So something I do recommend, that if you're going to be smack dab in the middle of a very large urban area and someone was to come to me, I would say, can you move out a little bit, because you're going to be spending 2 years just getting your facility permits.
Right. Not to mention you have to do extra carbon filters. You have to do, the energy is more expensive.
Parking, think about parking. How are you going to get someone, and usually also with fire truck turnarounds and things like that are required with new permits. I mean, sometimes it's not even feasible.
Right. And it'd be good to know that ahead of time, right?
Yeah. So, that's why checklists are kind of nice. And I will always say, hey, go to a suburban area, an industrial place, look for the buildings that are around you. Did they look like my buildings? Car mechanic shops, things like that, or powder coating places, or things like that. You get into those industrial areas, and you're doing a lot better, because it's you're going to be able to actually get a permit to operate.
Yeah, not near a new home building community with a school, right, and a rec center.
Right, the school. Yes, exactly.
It's never going to happen.
No, it's never going to happen. And that's I'm actually surprised that people are still, they go for a license or whatever, and then they find, wow, look, there's a school or something very nearby. You got to do your homework, guys. So.
Yeah, that's true.
And having written several licenses, it it's a lot of work. So be ready to spend a lot of midnight hours, putting your blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Right, and I would say anybody who goes through the process, they would get a PhD, though you
Yeah,
already have multiple ones. But I would say
exactly.
it's a lot of work, but a great education going through the
Oh
process.
yeah, yeah. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I like entrepreneurs. I like working with entrepreneurs. They're the guys who are taking the risk. They're doing it in conjunction with the investor. Sometimes they are the investor. These are some things that you should be baking into your plan. You should be talking about them with your investor. Do I buy the $5,000 car that gets 5 miles a gallon, or should I buy the $20,000 car that gets 100 miles a gallon? You need to think about these things because they affect your bottom line tremendously. And these items right here are they'll go right to your bottom line. So sustainability isn't just an environmental feel good idea. It's actually business.
Yeah, well, the board that you have there behind you, it's a little hard to see. So I'm wondering after this, if you could screenshot that or do something and
We'll
post
do
it,
that.
a link to
Yeah,
that
we'll
would
post
be
it.
great.
Yeah.
So what are the links that people can find? Where can they find your website? How can they get a hold of you? Stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, so you can find us on the web, www.extraktLAB.com, EXTRAKT lab.com. On there, we have mini courses, we have guides, we have extraction guides, we have solvent removal guides, we have distillation guides, we have business guides, we have facility guides, we have growing guides, we have curing guides, and so we've written a lot of materials. I probably have at least 400 pages worth of materials. They're all broken up, of course, into digestible pieces of content. We have calculators. Those have been extremely popular, the calculators that we have. So, if you're looking to create a pro forma for your business, or you're looking to understand how the impact of energy or the general usage, operating costs, go to our website. We have a calculators button right at the very top, and you can go take a look at that. The last thing I would recommend if you're getting into this, we have a lot of resources where we walk through the entire process step by step. We have a live tour also that you can click on. So if you're interested in a live tour for one particular piece of equipment, you can get a live tour that way. So there's lots of opportunities there for everyone, something for everyone, really, I think. And we put a lot of effort into education for the people who want to know. They may or may not be, wanting to get into the business, but there's tremendous amount of education materials on there.
It's a tremendous value that you provide just by doing that, like say education. So what are you excited to be working on this year to close it up here?
Yeah, I mean, we have so we're basically making our next gen chromatography system, which is a separation system for separating out CBD, THC, CBN, CBG into different components. That happens to be my area of expertise, and we have a really great system that's coming out. It'll be applicable to nutraceuticals, to hemp, to pharmaceuticals. It's a very large system. So we've been working on that. This year also we have we just started on our mini courses, and by the end of the year we will be full on mini courses. We'll have at least a dozen of them up there, and we've been doing a lot of GMP consulting lately, to tell you the truth. Because a lot of the people out there, they're looking at this wonderful market that we're in, and they're saying, okay, the Banking Act's going to go through. That is going to skyrocket, this whole entire market, and that'll be a ripple heard around the world too. That'll be global growth, and so we're getting ready for that. We've been dealing with a lot of forward thinkers on that related to GMP. So people getting GMP certifications, people wanting checklists for those. And we have software that we've introduced about a year and a half ago That's a batch record software. It's a quality management software. It's a laboratory information management. It basically takes your whole entire work process and puts it all together. So if you want to demo that too, we're giving demos of that. So that's really what's on the docket for this year. I can't wait. And my book will be coming out at the end of the year. So
great. Wow.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Sounds
it's going to be
good.
fun.
Well, this will be a great year, and I look forward to seeing
2021.
comments on more of these. And yeah.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, good. Well, we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Take care now.
Okay, let's see.